Well, hello, free people of the Rocky Mountain region. This is Brandon from Free State, Colorado. And today I'm joined by our special super guest, Natalie Menten, taxpayer advocate, one of the most well informed and well spoken political activists here in the state of Colorado. Natalie, I hope you're well and thanks for joining us tonight.
I am doing fine. Thank you. I'm glad to be here. And we're going to talk about this alleged budget gap that they keep talking about. And so we're going to show some people some things and then give them some going away points as they encounter this over the next few months here.
Definitely. We want to empower you as an individual here in Colorado to stand up for the Taxpayers' Bill of Rights, keep more money in your pocket, and get you informed about what's actually happening in our state government. So, Natalie, we call it a myth, but why is it a myth? What's the real goal here?
Well, number one, this is the same story that they've been talking about for a long time, and they keep don't realize the actual problem, which is a spending problem. It's not a revenue problem. It's, say it again, a spending problem, not a revenue problem. And so, what's the real thing here is we've got a more than usual chatter down at the state legislature about a budget gap, and that they've got a 1.2, $1.3 billion shortfall in what they would like to spend. That'll be the key there. And really what it is going after is setting the stage for, again, a issue either referred by the legislature or if they can't get the willpower there, then they would go through the initiative process to eliminate our taxpayers' Bill of Rights, specifically speaking to the revenue caps or spending caps that we're going to talk about here in a little bit. So they keep, as we've described, this is chatter down at the Capitol. When you go to town halls, you're going to hear the local legislators talk about this. And that's why partly, excuse me, we wanted to bring it up here, is that so when you do hear it, you'll know what actually is going on behind the scenes.
100%. You got to look past the propaganda, see the reality of what's happening here. So, you may have seen those headlines, these articles out there, folks. They're going to be more and more prevalent, of course, as this conversation continues. These poor young children with the developmental delays are getting fewer services. That's, of course, the tugging at the heartstrings. That's the MO, the way that they try and present this to the voters, of course. Here's the Denver Post. Facing billion-dollar budget gap, Colorado House leader says state may need TABOR reform. Of course, that's from back in February. So they're laying the seeds, they're laying this groundwork. A few more articles here. Denver 7, Colorado cutting funding for critical care of babies, toddlers with developmental needs. Of course, you got to protect the babies. Colorado Sun, Colorado lawmakers amid tight budget plan to shut down 20-year-old program getting teens involved at the Capitol, the Colorado Youth Advisory Council. Rural Colorado schools already hurting for resources could be choked by proposed funding cuts. Colorado budget crisis imperils state worker raises, threatening to break union contracts. So these sensationalist types of headlines, of course, all have that same agenda, at least in my perspective, is to make the case of why they need to take more of our tax money.
And I'm going to speak to like the last example there where they're talking about the upcoming obligations would be the best word on taxpayers to pay for the Colorado Winds, the union that was formed. And now, and I was sitting there in the Joint Budget Committee when they were hearing on this, and then looked into it further after that. The amount of extra costs due to the union that were never forecasted to the extent that they're seeing now. So they try to make it sound like in this headline that this is budget crisis, and they don't mention the fact, first of all, this was increased government approved by the government. It was supposed to be forecasted on money. They came in under forecasting it, and now they're complaining when it costs too much. But it was an expansion they wanted. So, always the children. Definitely going to have the children being brought into the headlines here when we look at it. But as you see, these are channels where they really don't go into depth on what these other different parts are. Again, why are we doing this video? It's to show some of these things that don't get shared when you hear the headline on that 22-second or 44-second clip before the Broncos come on, or whatever sport, Rockies, I guess now. But anyway, they don't go into the depth to explain these things, so that's why we're doing this. So I just want to bring those two up, and then we can keep going because we got some slides to go through here.
No, 100%. I mean, that's what they're
Yeah.
telling us. That's the narrative. This is what we're going to continue to hear. But yeah, like you said, we're going to get you some new talking points, show you the other side of the story. We're going to go into some of the details here in the state budget and tell you what they aren't telling you down there at the state capitol.
Yep. So starting here, and Brandon, thank you for getting some of these slides together, which are really great to explain what we've got going on. This is an overview of tax collections and how much they've increased between 2020 and 2024. And you'll see the percent of change uh, really indicating and showing that the state government has continued to grow further and further. Look at the year 2020, you've got 15.9 billion. And then here jumping all the way just a few years later, 2024, all the way up to almost $24 billion. That is a substantial amount of growth. And we're going to talk what partly goes into the explanation of that and why they should not be crying down there. Really, this is a continuing thing that people need to remember. When the government continues to say what a cut is, what that really, really means is less than what they want to spend. And generally, a government would spend as much as it could. So when it says, "Oh, we got this cut," well, you're still growing. You still get to grow as much. And that's partly why our Taxpayers Bill of Rights is a beautiful thing, because it keeps those guardrails on the system so that everybody who can't be down there at the state capitol, pretty much 12 months a year. Okay, yeah, you got the legislative session, but you got interim committees. You got this and that. To keep an eye on the government is a 365 days a year, 24 hours a day. And TABOR is the natural thing that protects us so that we don't have to dedicate that. You can actually go out in your yard, rake leaves, do spring cleaning, and you don't have to be down at the Capitol sitting there for hours wondering when the committee hearing is going to start, and then get your 2 minutes. So anyway, okay, sorry, I had to go on a rant there
Love it. I
because
love
I've
it.
been
No,
doing some of that lately, and it's not so fun.
no,
All right.
100% agree. Tabor does the
No,
work
I
for
mean,
us.
today I was sitting there waiting for a bell. I'm doing my regular work, but I'm waiting for the bell. And they finally at the end figure out, and this was civil asset forfeiture actually. Because the sponsor, I guess, couldn't make the hearing, they were never going to have the hearing on that, but they did bother to advertise it. So, when they do that with the TABOR things and goes on, anyway, thank God for virtual. So again, I'm sorry about the little rant there, but there we go.
No, great points all around. Really appreciate it. Thank you so much for your advocacy down at the Capitol, standing up for taxpayers, standing up for our taxpayers' Bill of Rights. But I just, it's so
And
important for
I'm
people
not the
to.
only one. There are other people who do this. So for anybody who's watching this video, get in the groove. All right. Forget about daytime soap operas or, Fox News or the little chat where they're talking about clothing or whatever. Listen to these committee meetings. You can do virtual testimony and you can be talking about things like whether it's the environment, taxes, or local government or agriculture. You know, I mean, it's like, we hate to say it that this is like a game in a way. I mean, think of it as like a game show where, instead of you watching Price is Right, or I don't know what the latest game show is, get involved with your government. Hit or miss, whether you're going to win. But you know what? At least you're in the middle of the game, right? Okay, boy. All right.
100%. No, good stuff, Natalie. Love it. Love the passion. Love the energy. When you got to get more people fired up, that's for sure. But 5 years ago was really not that long ago. Of course, maybe it feels like it to some of us, but really, realistically, from a fiscal perspective, it's not that long. So to think that tax collections are going up by $7.5 billion, I mean, that's a lot of money over these last 5 years. It's more than $1 billion a year. I mean, they have more money than they've ever had. I don't see any improvement in our society, which we'll get into at the end here, but they have enough. They have more than enough. So let's take a look here. So this is an important graphic. This is
It
something
is.
people should
Yep.
really be paying attention to because it shows the TABOR revenue, the TABOR limit base, and then the referendum C cap. Do you mind quickly just kind of going through this with us, Natalie?
Yeah. So you're going to see all these figures and don't really worry about all of that stuff. Where to focus on right here is just these colored bars. And we're just going to talk for a moment on these two lines that start over on the left side of the graphic and then move up in an upward trend. So you've got that one right there. That's the TABOR limit base. TABOR, Taxpayers Bill of Rights, put in by voters 1992, over 30 years old. It said government gets to grow by inflation plus population. It's a formula. That represents what that line should have been. Should have been. And everything above that, that very appropriate growth of level, I mean, for inflation plus population, that's appropriate way for government to grow. Everything up to that red line, we were in excess of that, I should say, in excess of that red line above it, we were supposed to get TABOR refunds. Well, in 2005, this ballot issue was run by the legislature. Referendum C was actually referenda C and D, but Ref C is the one that passed. Well, it claimed to be a 5-year time out on giving up your refunds. That was a headline. I just looked up one of the groups that's left, nonprofit think tank, and the way they tried to spiel it there, it's just a 5-year timeout. What they didn't say, though, is broadly to the average person, is that what it also did is said, we're going to have a reset of that TABOR limit. And it's going to go to the highest point during the 5 years where we were doing a timeout and you don't get your refunds. So it reset it at a higher level. And from there, that's what creates this appropriate brown, crappy green color line. So you can see that right above that. Well, all of that money, and then finishing it here, these little pieces over here on the right that you see, that blue, I mean, look at that's little pieces. That's our TABOR surpluses that came back to us in refunds in a variety of ways. So back to what has the government kept out of this? All the numbers aside, you see the big gap here, this valley, this trench in between the bottom line and that's what right above there. That is a total of 40, I have a slide, over $40 billion that the taxpayers forfeited and didn't really recognize they were giving it up. They knew there was the 5-year timeout, but they didn't recognize the forever impact also of Ref C taking that chunk there, over $40 billion. So now we're just getting scraps up there on top, as far as I'm concerned. Look at that. Ref C's keeping money every year. We've only gotten refunds in some years. Yeah, we had a good economy. That's why TABOR says inflation plus population. And so just the main thing on this screen is to remember the government over the span of Ref C till now has taken over $40 billion extra from us. Meanwhile, we've gotten refunds, that those bits over there, in just a rough figure, depending on what year, fiscal year, all that, about 15 billion. And so with that, you can see that the government has kept a tremendous more amount of money. My battery was starting to go low, so hopefully it'll make through our whole presentation, but sorry. Anyway, if you want to, do you have any comments on it? I mean, that's the big takeaway from it. It was sold, misleading. A lot of people didn't get it, didn't realize forever impact. And then what amounts to now we're just getting scraps. So when the government says, you know, we got a budget cut, TABOR's the problem. Well, the reality is they've taken a majority of the TABOR and now they want to take away the little pieces we're still getting.
100% well said. Yeah, the government's over collecting. If we were sticking with our state constitution, the voter approved ballot measure, Taxpayers Bill of Rights, our economy would be in such better shape. You'd have more money in your pocket. Taxpayers would be able to keep more of their hard earned money. But unfortunately, we're in this situation where, like you said, we're getting scraps of what we should be getting. So the government's taking enough, folks. It's enough is enough. People are struggling to pay their bills, struggling to get by. They don't need any more, as we're going to get into here. So I thought this was important here too, Natalie. This is from the December 2024 fiscal forecast from our state government, our state legislature here. They show that the even with referendum C, like we were just talking about, it says, quote, with these adjustments, state revenue subject to TABOR exceeded the referendum C cap by 1.36 billion in fiscal year 23-24. The state refund obligation totals $1.65 billion in the current fiscal year 2024 to 2025. So I mean, this is so important, people. This is $1.65 billion that was over collected by our state government. They took more money than they're constitutionally allowed, and it's coming back to us. And it's going to come back to us, the people here in our communities, coming back through us through a variety of mechanisms, which we'll show. Before we get to that, any comments on this one, Natalie?
Just that again, this is about when we talk about DTABOR and these different things. That's really meaning getting rid of this modest cap, the inflation plus population formula, and that's what we're really talking about. So they know, just keep that in mind, because so many people don't understand all the pieces of TABOR. That's why we need a TABOR 1 through 9 primer. We'll get on that sometime soon. But anyway, I just wanted to clear that up, that they're talking about the refunds that we are getting in the mail.
110%. And some of these refunds we get, as you said, there's the sales tax refund. So people who are filing their income tax form here, which is coming up here on April 15th, of course. We talked about that in a previous video, very popular video. People are really interested in that. But also some of the more disadvantaged people in our communities, like disabled, Gold Star, so that's widows of military veterans. They're getting a homestead property tax exemption. Whether they're seniors who've been living here in Colorado for a certain number of years and live in their home, they're going to save some money. And that's TABOR helping people. It's helping people stay in their homes, helping people keep their property taxes lower than they otherwise would be. And then, of course, very fairly in many ways, giving out this tax refund to people across the state. I know there's probably better ways they could do it. And then the most important one there, tell us about that income tax rate reduction, Natalie.
Yeah, that's just built right into, well, the reason it's generated, first of all, is TABOR's supposed to go back to the people who paid in the money and there was an excess. So that's one of the things keep in mind when we're talking refund mechanisms. Well, the income tax rate reduction is one of the most direct ways there is to do that. And that is by saying, first of all, in a theory, don't collect the money in the first place. Don't over collect it. And so when they've got an income tax rate, then that means it was never taken out of your pocket. Now, some people, because of their withholding and whatnot, end up paying a higher rate maybe than they should. But it is going right back to the person who's going to be filing the income tax return. And I say that compared to refundable tax credit, where we lost, I didn't even talk about this, it's not in the slides, House Bill 1311, which took, I have to remember the figure, roughly $1 billion out of our money going into refundable tax credits, meaning somebody didn't even necessarily pay it in and they get it. So an income tax rate reduction is that most direct way to give the taxpayer back their money. The 6-tier sales tax refund really is from sales tax. We pay a lot of sales tax, state of Colorado. And with this one, it is a little bit harder to say, okay, this person shopped at all these different stores, paid this much sales tax, we're going to give them their refund. So it is applied by how much income you make. And people need to be paying attention to these two refunds, because in the 2024 tax form is where you're going to see those. And you have till April 15th, it's tax day in April, to either claim these or file an extension, which will take you through then October to get the tax return in, as long as you, well, don't only be, I'm not going to give tax advice, but the deadline's coming up and people need to keep that in mind. So even if somebody is retired, their income was put in investments where they pretty much don't have to pay income tax in their later years or retirement years, they still have the sales tax refund, because assuming, they make, I don't know what, 100,000 or something in retirement or whatever, they've gone out, bought stuff, paid sales tax, went to the state of Colorado, and now they're getting some of it back. These are all the reasons why we really need to keep these refunds present. And when these legislators are going to town halls and saying, we got to get rid of TABOR, and they'll say, make you remember, oh, do you remember the check was just that small? Well, the overarching picture here is you get your refunds back in a variety of ways. They're not even telling you all of them. Some of them may not even know all of it.
It's a
So
fair point. Very fair point. But yeah, the TABOR, the Taxpayers Bill of Rights, folks, putting more money in your wallet. You work so hard for your money. This is more time you can spend with your family, less time working. Keeping your taxes low has real world positive effects for all of us, of course. You know, we all want to keep more of our money we earn. So just the value there, always got to bring that up. And then this is a great graphic you have here, Natalie, this explaining the Taxpayers Bill of Rights. So there is a measure of growth, right? We saw that on that bar chart earlier that went up every year. So TABOR allows the state government to reasonably increase the amount of collections they take every year, which is why this we see this growth. So the government can get more money based on how many people are living here.
yeah, and just starting with why was TABOR formed? Why was the Taxpayers Bill of Rights formed? Well, one, it was property tax issues going on just like we have now, but also government growth was growing at a faster rate than uh, the free market, household income, all those different factors, which so that's where the money comes from for government. Well, if government's growing faster than those other comparables, that's not sustainable. So 30 years ago, TABOR got put in by the voters. It wasn't thanks to the gold dome at the Capitol. It was citizen power right there that put it in our Constitution and um, allows that moderate growth for government. And they don't like that. They want it all. They don't want you getting a refund. So that's why we're doing this video.
100%. And so as inflation increases, as the population
Uh,
increases, the state is allowed to collect more money.
yeah. And I should note on this one slide, just so everybody's real clear, because it is a huge source of confusion, that what this graphic explains here, when we're referring to inflation plus population, that is the state TABOR growth limit. Fortunately, in TABOR, it protects us at local government levels also, for those who still have it. And that's a different formula. It's inflation plus local growth. So I just want to clear up that people will try to say the population one is with local, and it's not. It's actually local growth. And with schools, it's student enrollment. TABOR thinks through these things. And so we're just using the state formula right now in this topic.
Awesome. Great example. Great
Yeah.
clarification there. I thought this was so important too for people to see the spending increase. This is over at the Common Sense Institute. They have this really cool graphic here. Really recommend people check it out. It actually will move and you can watch the growth in government. You can watch. So this is the total operating appropriations to each state department. They have it for the last 17 years. So you can see where all this money is going. You know, the state government's growing at a huge rate, thankfully constrained on some level, but they're spending like drunken sailors, you know. So here we see fiscal year 2020, going back to that time, you know, $33 billion. Fiscal year, most recent one here, 2025, $43 billion. I mean, nearly a $10 billion increase in the last 5 years in state spending. Lots and lots of money, of course, that they're just spending. A lot of it's going to this healthcare policy and financing, education, of course, but you know, programs that aren't necessarily meeting their obligations, aren't necessarily doing what they say they are. It's more than enough money. $10 billion. It's absolutely crazy. And even if you look from year to year, here's 2024 to 2025, their annual amount of total operating appropriations to each state department went up by $2 billion, 2.2 billion. So all these politicians who are complaining about a budget deficit, hey, just decrease your spending back a year, 6 months ago, 2 years ago. I mean, it's not so unrealistic that all of us out here in the real world have to cut our spending back to maybe what it was a year ago as inflation increases, as maybe there's other economic opportunities that people don't have. You got to make cuts. You got to tighten your budget a little bit. It's not unreasonable to say, hey, you know, you got a $2 billion increase in spending over a year. You know, you might want to rethink that, Mr. Politician there.
Yeah. Yeah. Agree.
This was a very interesting graph here. This shows the tax burden. So our state government actually provides this in their understanding the state budget document. I'll have everything linked at Free State Colorado, of course, but you can see the link there. So this is the tax collections as a percent of personal income. So 2023 is the most recent data showing federal, state, and local taxes. 27%. 27% of your personal income is going to some level of government. And that's high. I mean, that's really high. The highest we saw it in this graph at least was in 29% in 2022, but it's right up there. So it's like, you know, the government keeps taking more and more of our money. It's becoming a massive burden on our way of life. And that's just more time you have to work, more money you have to earn in order just to feed these politicians and their greedy plans.
Yes. Uh, as we've said, people know how to spend their money better than the government.
100%. Now, this was interesting. This is from the Colorado Department of Revenue. This kind of shows their annual report here from 2024. And I just thought it was interesting, because some of these tax collections have decreased. So, interestingly enough, people always ask about the marijuana tax money. That's actually gone down nearly 11% year over year. Cigarette, nicotine, tobacco products going down. Of course, their government's going after tobacco all the time, trying to get people to stop smoking. Property taxes, of course, these heat and rent and tax credits have taken a little chunk out of it. And then severance taxes. And I thought that was so interesting. But just to go through these really quickly, you can see marijuana taxes decreasing quite a bit there. No surprise. But I only bring this up because so many of these state and local governments develop these programs and they're going to say, oh, well, the marijuana money is going to pay for it. Well, then what happens when this marijuana money starts running dry? When people say they're not going to buy as much and all these government restrictions and regulations make it so people don't want to anyway, or new states get this marijuana stuff. So it's just interesting. I always think these short-sighted politicians to create these government programs based on this income that they're now getting, and then that money runs out, and then they start whining down at the Capitol or in your local town hall or your city council meeting and say, "We're running out of money now because all this money we were planning on is drying up." So just wanted to bring that up to people. I know it's more local, but any thoughts on this, Natalie?
Just that I have to grin when I see both, marijuana, um, adult products, let's call it that. And what they were trying to do is add enough taxes onto these products to make it like a sin tax, is what it's referenced. And think about Proposition EE, which was cigarette, cigars at certain levels, tobacco tax. And it was to be at a punitive level of taxation. And so they said, oh, we're going to get all these. It's going to go to schools. It's going to go to, I think that's the like the school lunch program, which is already now under, they're crying. That's one of the stories that, going back to the beginning of our presentation, one of the stories that you'll see, because they're coming up because there's going to be a ballot issue, but um, on another one. Anyway, with that, they're crying when these things go down, but the whole purpose in taxing people so much was to make it cost prohibitive. I mean, looking at like the cigarette tax, they made it minimum pack of cigarettes $7, $7.50, something like that. So the government's getting what it wants, but I have to laugh in all of this because ultimately voters approved it and they wanted just certain people to pay for the program. And now certain people are getting tired of paying for the program and they're quitting and they're using cessation, all these different things. And now the regular public's going to be paying for it. But I don't
Yeah,
think they thought about that at all when they were voting on it.
definitely. And you can see the jump here. You can see in 2021, you can see the marijuana, or excuse me, we're on cigarettes, tobacco. The tax revenue there was $228 million dollars. Then, of course, the taxes increase; they jump up dramatically with Proposition EE and all these punitive taxes, and now it jumps up to $370 million dollars. They say, "Hey, we're going to fund school lunches. We're going to do all these great things with this money." But then, what do you do when you overtax something? Well, you see that tax revenue start disappearing. So then it jumps down $17 million, then since over that, and then another $13 million. So it just keeps going down and down and down. So it's this cash cow for a very limited amount of time. But when they build these programs, saying we're going to collect $370 million for school lunches, and now they have a $30 million shortfall 2 years later. I mean, this is what happens, folks. So just wanted to point this out. Thought it was
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah. And I want to, there's Prop FF, and I think that's what will be coming to us on the ballot. The underspending, I'm sure that's what it is. It's retention and expansion from Prop FF. Prop FF, the bad guy in that one was the person making a certain amount of income, and they wanted to give or use deductions. One of the big deductions would be one mortgage interest, but another would be charitable donations. So the government said you get capped at your charitable donations, and after that, you can't use the full revenue laws like anybody else. And so is that going to see an impact on donations? Probably, but this is government. That's not a kind government. So I'll stop because we could talk later in the year about that when it comes up on the ballot.
Definitely, we'll be keeping an eye on that one for sure.
Yeah, we
And then,
will.
of course, oil and gas, so many of these legislators, these
Another thing
anti-energy,
they wanted to get rid of. Sorry.
yes, no, these anti-energy,
There's a thread here, a
anti
trend.
anti-civilization, I would say anti-human legislators who want to send
Bad,
us all
bad,
back to the
bad,
dark stages.
bad. And oh, we miss your money so much.
Right? I mean, look at that drop. They collected $340 million in 2023. A year later, they're down to 178 million. Wow. I mean, all these regulations, all these excessive control systems put on the oil and gas industry, and the money's drying up, and then they start running out of this tax money that they're relying on for their
And,
special programs.
and I'm going to say, I wonder how much of that is actually due to electric vehicles, but that's a whole nother rabbit hole. But then there's subsidies with that, isn't there?
Definitely. Now, this was interesting
That's a
as
whole
well.
nother story.
This is from showing state operating budget per capita. So this is always interesting, right? Because we talked about population growth, we talked about the changes in the demographics, but the per capita number really shows you a lot, right? So this
Yeah.
shows you how much the state government is spending, what is their operating budget on a per person basis, also adjusted for inflation on 2024 dollars. So here you go. 24 to 2025, $7,323 per person is basically what people are, you know, if you break it down that way, right, what each person's kind of expected to contribute in a way, or what the money they're using that way. But I just thought it was interesting because it shows how high it's been. Of course, you go back 10 years and it's 6,689. So it's like, yeah, sure, the population's increased. Sure, inflation's increased. They're still overspending. That's what this chart shows. They're still spending more than they were. Just go back 10 years, go back 5 years, for heaven's sakes, and it was still less than it is now. And the government was getting by, you know, just fine, right? Just fine, at least as good as they were doing now. Not that they were doing great back then in terms of fulfilling the obligations they have to the public. But nonetheless, this is continuing to increase. It's still high, and all these politicians are still crying about it.
Yeah, and they could keep adding regulations and laws and FTEs and all these different things. So again, where is the problem here? Spending problem.
Yes, and of course we can't not talk when we're talking about the state budget over the last 5 years, few years. We got to talk about COVID, of course. All of this money from the American Rescue Plan Act, ARPA. I mean, there's been so many articles, videos about how this money was fed to special interest groups, to these little politically connected nonprofits. So much of this money went into all these social programs. That's a whole nother situation that people should definitely look into if they're interested. But the fact of the matter here is that the federal government transferred $3.8 billion to the state of Colorado on May 18th, 2021. So under federal law, the state may use the funds for costs incurred from March 3rd, 2021 through December 31st, 2024. Geez. So all of a sudden, this is that same story of, maybe you hear it on the news where somebody wins the lottery. This happens to movie stars, to athletes. They get a huge payday. They get $1 million. Maybe they get $3.8 billion. And then guess what? 4 years later, they're broke because they spent it all. They misbudgeted. They misallocated the resources. And now they're crying because they're living on the streets.
And added programs and FTEs saying, oh, we'll just have them short term through the COVID. And now they are living. It's that is just mismanagement, frankly. That's what it is. You don't run
Yeah.
a budget like that when you know you got one-time funding and a tremendous amount of money, and they were blowing it here, blowing it there. And we did the recent video on this whole equity department that the county, and this chunk of it from the ARPA funds, and they're not getting rid of the employees. Okay, well, you're supposed to get anyway. Well, somebody will have to watch that video, and then we got another one we need to do on that too. Anyway,
And then look at the CARES Act here.
CARES
So here's
Act.
the
Yes,
CARES Act, the Coronavirus Relief Fund. So state and local governments, $150 billion throughout the country. Colorado got 2.2 billion. The state itself, 1.6 billion. Some of it went to the largest counties in the state, of course. But it's just this huge cash infusion. And then, like you said, Natalie, they added all these offices, hired all these people, created all these programs, and now the money is run dry, and they want to complain as if nobody saw it coming.
yeah, and just as a big reminder, because this is no magic tree. When we're talking about the CARES Act and when we're talking about ARPA funds, that's federal money that we're borrowing. We're borrowing it. So, this is, I mean, it's just I mean, this is a whole other subject, but really disturbing what we're paying in interest to the bankers on this loan to then turn around and be blowing the money. And that's what CARES Act and Republicans and Democrats both were guilty in stages for that. Especially when, I mean, it was the government that shut us down for how long? And then crying about, so who started the problem? And then, cut off revenue, then dump borrowed money on it like a bad bank deal, and then cry about it while you need to expand government because of all of it. It's just like a really bad story.
Yes. Yeah, don't fall for their propaganda, folks. And then I thought this was such an interesting story here from the Colorado Sun. This is from January 2024. So over a year ago. Over a year ago, Colorado officials thought they had 3 more years to spend $1.5 billion in federal COVID aid. They really only have 11 months. They had to spend it through the end of the year. So, all of a sudden, these headlines are popping up. What an emergency this budget gap is, this deficit. And of course, it's what the 1.5 billion. It's $1 billion, just like they thought they had to spend. Well, they didn't have the money to spend, and now they're crying about it. And what's interesting here in the article, it does say the money would be directed. It says in future years, the money would go to behavioral health care, teacher stipends, wildfire prevention projects. So as you hear these news stories come up and they're talking about behavioral health care, we saw an article about that, teacher stipends, wildlife prevention projects are going to say that's where the money's disappearing from. That's what we need. Well, this money was always going away. It was a short-term injection into the state, and it was never going to stick around. So, don't fall for all their little emotional appeals there. This is an interesting one, Natalie, for the Colorado State revenue by source. You want to walk us through this?
Yeah. I might. So basically, this is going back to what are the monies? Basically, the big picture here is the government says they don't have this money to spend. Well, they've already been diverting money outside of the TABOR limits by using enterprises. And what it again is same as the other slide we talked about earlier, reflecting we're only getting a fraction of what we should be from our TABOR money because they've diverted, again, using these enterprises. So what this is doing here is basically splitting out what is TABOR capped, and this is for the year 2022 to 23. Because TABOR's just a reminder why there's 2 years there. State of Colorado is June, July, so mid-year accounting. And so what is still within the TABOR limits, the amount of revenue where we still, if we pay too much, we get a refund back. That's at 20.26 billion between the general fund, cash funds. What's outside of TABOR, again, same kind of a theme. Who's the bigger piece of the pie here? The bigger piece of the pie is what's TABOR exempt, what the government gets to keep. In this case, that's the federal funds. So all that COVID money that came in, CARES Act, ARPA money, that came from the feds. TABOR does not include that in the revenue cap. So by virtue, it's exempt. We have fees, which is where they've used what we could call probably really improper, if not illegal, enterprise funds to divert taxpayers' bill of rights. You've got that chunk of money in there too. Total there about 38.7 billion for those fiscal years shown, which is a little bit old, but again, we're looking in retro there. So we still have this amount of revenue showing, again, 20.26 billion, still within that possibility of us not getting taxed to oblivion. It'll be capped by this natural guardian, TABOR. We need to fight to protect that TABOR defense against this 20.26 billion, whatever it is year to year, and just keep those bits that we are getting back. Because it's one of those things, if you give an inch, they'll take a mile. And that's what they continue to do with TABOR. So when they're taking little nibbles at it down at the state capitol, they're already doing that. We need more people testifying. I know it is difficult, especially working full time, but just even sending emails in right now, as we haven't even covered this yet, and we should. They are right now eyeballing another measure down at the state capitol. We began this whole video along that line. There is a discussion going on there. I ran into a legislator, I'll say a Dem, 6 weeks ago that said a bill was being circulated. They were trying to find sponsors to put something on the ballot to eliminate TABOR. So this is not some wild dream. Problem was they were getting some people, Dem, because Republicans aren't going to sign on to anything like that. They're solid down there to protect TABOR. The Dems, though, there's some legislators uncomfortable with that heat. And then there may be some, I would say maybe like Bob Marshall, Democrat, that may be opposed to it from the get-go, that don't want to sign on to something like eliminating our taxpayers' Bill of Rights more. So the point being here, a quick, easy thing to do. If you can't figure out the bills, if you don't want to worry about it, it's kind of like, just putting it aside. Don't worry about the bills. Just sending a quick email to your legislator, whichever they may be, Republican and Democrat, and say, I don't know of any bills right now specifically to address. I just want you to know, capital letters, you can scream it, I want my TABOR refund. And then just send it to them. Thank you, resident, whatever you are. But it sends the word to keep them reluctant. I mean, we really don't need to be investing a lot of extra of our time this fall, this year, to be battling a major, major TABOR issue. So just by sending that note, it reinforces. They hear from you, because trust me, folks listening, many of you already know this, they're hearing from the NGOs every day. And when I say NGOs, that's non-governmental organizations, nonprofits who are funded by tax dollars, funneled to them. Then they turn around, they advocate for getting rid of taxpayers' Bill of Rights. These are paid lobbyists in a lot of the cases. Some are volunteers, a lot of still lobbyists, people who are paid to do this, are down there and saying, we need to get rid of TABOR. It's the biggest issue in Colorado. We've heard legislators run on it. So just keeping it in, sorry, go off on this, but writing an email is really like a 3-minute thing. Just to find that name, do a quick jot, connect with them on Nextdoor or Facebook. You probably don't know them on Nextdoor. But Facebook, tag them, and just let them hear these things. Sorry, I'm just trying to really defend. Now, the last thing I want to do this fall is for us to have more issues than we can deal with. Sure would be nice to have a summer where we weren't having major, major battles.
100% well said for sure. And I think it's so telling here. We have 2/3 of the state revenue coming into Colorado that is TABOR exempt. So, it's just totally a spending problem. As you pointed out earlier, it's just a small fraction, really, of the money coming in that's subject to TABOR. When you look at the big picture, right, it's nearly $60 billion here of this revenue. So just important for people to keep that in mind, that so much of it's TABOR exempt already, whether it's the federal funds, the fees, these enterprise funds, all these possibly, dishonest ways in which they take our money. But good point. We have to stand up. We have to protect our taxpayers' Bill of Rights, because as we saw earlier, it definitely has some serious benefits for us.
Yep.
So yeah, as you saw in that previous graph, about 30% of the operating funds for state departments is from federal funds. So of course, people are worried about that the Trump administration is going to cut off some funding to Colorado based on our sanctuary state policies, our anti-Second Amendment policies, whatever they may be, some policies that the president doesn't like, coming after them. And that's 30% of the of the state budget for these, or the funds for these state departments, folks. So that's a lot of money coming in that way. So just wanted to bring that up, because that's always an important part of the conversation for sure.
Yeah. And some of that may be not even negotiable, frankly. Gas taxes may be examples, like certain, but it is a fair amount, and it is still all tax money.
Definitely. Now, this is such a big thing, folks. We're talking about overspending, right? How much our state government is overspending money. This is the other half of the story they don't want to talk about. We saw how much they've collected more money than ever. The tax burden on people is as high as it's ever been. And the problem is a spending problem, folks. They're collecting more than enough money. This was a recent article, of course, that really kind of spelled it out, from Sean Boyd here at CBS News Denver. As Colorado budget shortfall grows, a state senator questions $4 million in spending on new furniture. Now, I think they did bring that down a little bit, but nonetheless, millions of dollars being spent on new furniture down at the state capitol. A lot of money going through there. Thought this was interesting here too. Digging into that same article at the top here, it says the Republican says lawmakers have simply overspent, pointing out the state has added more than 7,000 full-time employees and 17 new state offices in the last 6 years alone. 7,000 new full-time employees. That's how many new employees the governor has there, basically. So much of that's at the executive level for sure with all these state offices, but 6 years, that's huge. That's huge. And then, of course, Medicaid, all this money's going there. So interesting stuff. Any thoughts on this, Natalie?
Just, I think that summarizes it right there. You look at those FTEs that in full-time employees, expansion, and we've seen it in little bits and bills. I mean, more and more programs and so many steering outside of really what the government's core functions need to be. With the health policy, uh, there's just been a lot of factors there, but I think a lot of it comes down to expansion for those covering those, let's say it this way, that may be eligible or may not be. I'll leave it at that.
Right. And a good point there. Here's some of the non-eligible
Yeah.
people.
Yeah.
$7 million paid for dead Medicaid recipients here. The Office of Inspector General has recommended that Colorado has to pay back the federal government $3.8 million and a further $2.2 million for other Medicaid expenditures that the state agency had previously overreported. So, folks, the state government does not manage their money well. We all have to live within a budget. We have constraints, and you see these things. You see all this overspending. You see poor spending, and how much this money is really going to where it needs to be. I mean, the roads have not improved. So many of our services in Colorado have not improved, but nonetheless, they're getting more money than ever. So, the big question here, what is all this spending done, right? We've seen this massive increase. I love this. Shots on X, formerly Twitter, had put this little graphic together about where our state's at. Third most dangerous state in the country, number one in bank robberies, car theft, cocaine use. We're the number one state for restaurant price inflation. We're the sixth most regulated state. Number three for drug use and addiction. Sixth most expensive state to live in. Sixth worst state to retire in. Coloradans need now $15,000 more to maintain their 2021 standard of living. The ninth worst state for an individual to save money. Sixth most expensive state for car insurance. So there you go. Seventh worst state for new business survival. Homelessness increasing. Denver's the worst city to raise a family. So I mean, not to be too doom and gloom and too negative here, folks, but it's just this idea of they want more and more every year. They're trying to take our tax refunds away from us. They're trying to take away our taxpayer protections. And what do we get? What do the people, what do the hardworking families of Colorado get for it? Well, there it is right there.
And I'm going to say I haven't vetted all of this list, but just speaking from regular life and the cost of living, the increased burdens, the reluctance, why would so many laws down at the Capitol? Why would you want to open a new business, especially certain that they don't care about business owners, and going back to, has Colorado improved or not? And it's hard to see how things are going in the right direction. I think that's a summary of what Shots put up there.
Definitely. So let's get some talking points here, Natalie. When
Yep.
you're out at a town hall, you're talking to your neighbor, you see a news article, and they say there's a $1.3 billion shortfall. What are some things people can say to kind of have a rebuttal there?
Okay, so as we showed in the slides prior, there was this one-time COVID money, ARPA and CARES, dumped a huge amount of money into the state. The state knew, and the local governments that took portions of it, this was one-time funding. And it came with restrictions, things like that. That big purpose being this was one time, and we should not be hiring full-time employees, things that were not going to be sustained with the regular source of revenue in the state. But the government didn't do that. Instead, they expanded, expanded, expanded. So the COVID money almost like artificially inflated our economy. They've added it, overspent, added full-time employees, overspent, and the tax collections they shown before, record high. So when they talk about a shortfall, that's again their wish list compared against to what should be the reasonable amount they should be allowed to grow with. They don't think that's enough.
Definitely. Here's another one here you might hear out there in the world, people. Colorado is cutting funding for these critical programs. We saw that in some of the headlines at the beginning of the presentation. So what can people say to that, Natalie?
Just this again shown in the slides. You can look back at these earlier in the presentation. Spending per capita per person with that adjusted all time high. The state's own reports showing that tax burden per person is nearly the highest it's ever been. So when they say that they're cutting programs, yet it continues to be more and more and more and more expensive for the taxpayer of what the government is creating in cost for us. And do we see the services and all that thing as a whole nother issue? But they need to be trimming down the massive artificial expansion they created before they can even be talking about cutting critical programs. That really comes down to spending priorities. And TABOR is smart enough, it doesn't say, I require you to spend this much on school and this much on street. TABOR says you, the legislator, need to choose the priorities. And if they're talking about cutting the critical programs, meanwhile, they're giving away money to a Sundance Film Festival thing and a variety of other different things that they want to do. Well, those are not critical programs. Letting the state treasurer, right now, they are allowing him to take $50 million, put it into a low yield, higher risk investment policy for one of their programs. That's not a good way to spending money. Is first of all, it's a risk for taxpayers, and then they're going to claim that they don't have the money for critical programs. These are choices that they get to make. All right, next one.
When they say Tabor is the problem, what can people say?
First of all, unless somebody in the audience doesn't agree with us, but I think most people will. Do you know how to spend your money better than the government? Answer is probably yes. Just remind that of them at a town hall, though. A lot of these legislators, really, who they hear from is, I want, I want, I want, I want, I want. They don't hear enough from the person going, I'm just walking up to you and saying, I don't want anything more from you. Just let me keep my money. I don't want anything more. Let me just keep my money. They don't hear that enough. They get ratioed by the I want more government, I want more government, I want more government. Because if you're the person that says, enough, you got enough of my tax money, of course you're not walking up and going, I want this and I want this, I want that. You're just not saying anything. So they're actually not hearing when we do that. We need to actually be vocal and walk up and go, I'm not asking for anything more in government. Just let me keep my money. So anyway, there's there. Okay. Then the Ref C. They have kept 40 folks. Remind your legislator in the town hall because they don't want to talk about Ref C. Some may not even understand, frankly, what occurred. That was a while ago. And again, it was supposed to be a 5-year timeout. And here now we have given up $41 billion. Let the government keep that. That would have been refunded to us. They've had 41 billion, big billion. Sorry, emphasizing. So they have had plenty of opportunity to choose the priorities. And when they continue to expand, that's their problem. We're not giving up more of our money.
Perfect. Well, awesome, Natalie. I think this was some great information for people. Hopefully it's some useful information. They can better understand our state budget, understand the myths about this so-called budget deficit, and have a voice and get involved, speak out. Just like you said, reach out to your legislator, show up. People, first rule of politics is just to show up at these town halls, city council meetings, legislative hearings, whatever you're capable of doing. I'm sure that you could do something. Send an email, make a phone call, reach out to these people, let them know that you want to keep the money you earn. You think your family deserves the money you work for better than these politicians and their ridiculous agendas. And share this information out there with people. Please like, subscribe, share, comment. I know it's a little bit of a longer video than we were planning, but it's so much information. And we really want to give you the tools to be empowered, to make great decisions, and to be an informed Coloradan. That's what we're here for.
And I talked too much, so I have to apologize for all that. But I started ranting about stuff, so it was, a little hard. So,
Good stuff.
all
Good
of that,
stuff.
you don't have to hunt up the town halls and take 2 hours out of your Saturday morning. Just again, a quick note. Quick note. It's your city councilor, your county commissioner, your state rep, and your state senator. It's just
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Natalie. Look forward to talking to you again soon. And yeah, we got a lot more to share with people, that's for sure.
yeah, the legislature session is not over yet. So we'll talk more.
Definitely. Well, awesome. We'll appreciate your time tonight.